I was hired to be the ultimate American patriarch, but in reality, I was a queer hostage trapped inside a multi-million-dollar heterosexual propaganda machine. The 1970s television networks aggressively manufactured Robert Reed as the flawless father of the Brady Bunch, the undisputed king of the wholesome American living room. But place this pristine legacy on the autopsy table, and the sitcom laughter instantly dies. We uncover a brutal, corporate-enforced psychological quarantine. Behind the heavily policed suburban facade, his authentic queer identity was classified by executives as a catastrophic threat to their syndication empire. He wasn't just a television actor. The network weaponized his body as the biological mascot for traditional family values. They held his livelihood hostage, legally chaining a gay man to a meticulously sanitized, hyper-heterosexual public persona. But the psychological straitjacket of America's favorite lie ultimately ended in a devastating medical reality. When a highly stigmatized virus complicated his final days, the industry didn't mourn a legend. They aggressively sanitized his medical records and whitewashed his corpse, desperate to protect their highly profitable reruns from the reality of a queer tragedy. Welcome to Gay Hollywood History. Today we investigate Robert Reed, the Brady Bunch propaganda, and the secret gay life they buried. Long before he was molded into the sanitized emblem of American fatherhood, he was simply a deeply sensitive boy named John Robert Reitz Jr. Born in 1932 in the quiet suburbs of Illinois, his internal compass was never aligned with ordinary domestic existence. He possessed a refined, fragile, artistic spirit, a mind inherently drawn to the towering heights of classical theater. He was, in essence, a brilliant nightingale caught in the unforgiving hands of his own geographical fate. When his family relocated to a sprawling turkey farm in the rugged rural landscape of Oklahoma, his reality fractured into a waking nightmare. To understand the genesis of his lifelong pursuit of perfection, you must visualize the isolating terror of this specific environment for a closeted, highly sensitive child. This was not a charming, rustic upbringing painted by Norman Rockwell. To young John, the Oklahoma farm was a suffocating physical enclosure. He was surrounded by the stench of livestock, the endless layers of Midwestern dust, and the deafening, unrefined noise of agricultural labor. This rural confinement etched a permanent psychological scar into his soul. He despised the grime, the sheer chaos, and the profound lack of aesthetic beauty. This dust-choked cage planted the dark seeds of a lifelong obsession with immaculate control and flawless presentation. He felt a desperate need to scrub the rural dirt off his own skin, both physically and psychologically. He realized early on that his only genuine escape from this purgatory was to forge an impenetrable intellectual armor. He did not dream of becoming a commercial television actor hawking soap and cereal. He needed the respected, hallowed halls of classical theater to save his life. Fighting his way out of the Oklahoma dust, he secured a coveted position at the prestigious Northwestern University. There, he threw himself into the highest forms of academic training. He was building a sophisticated intellectual fortress designed to protect his fragile, hidden identity from the brutal ignorance of the outside world. But the ultimate escape required an ocean between him and his past. He secured passage to the revered Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, RADA, in London. The magnitude of this historical shift cannot be overstated. The terrified boy from the turkey farm was now immersing his soul into the sacred texts of William Shakespeare. He was walking the same heavy wooden stage boards as the greatest dramatic titans of the British Empire. He transformed himself. He methodically stripped away every microscopic trace of the rural farm boy. He cultivated a sophisticated, cultured, aristocratic speaking voice. He forged an intimidating, highly intellectual persona. He genuinely believed that if he could master the complex classical arts of the theatrical elite, he could finally escape the cages of his youth. The high classical stage, he hoped, would provide a safe sanctuary for his hidden reality. Returning to the United States as a serious, highly trained, dramatic heavyweight, he expected to conquer the respected theaters of New York. He believed the worst cages of his life were behind him. He was unaware that the American entertainment machine was already preparing to build an infinitely more terrifying, highly polished golden prison awaiting his arrival. In the paranoid, intensely conservative American society of the 1950s, the entertainment industry demanded absolute conformity. For a sensitive, intellectual actor hiding a criminalized homosexual identity, the threat of professional and social ruin hung over his head every single waking second. The brutal McCarthy era and the chilling Lavender Scare ensured that any deviation from the manufactured American heterosexual ideal would be punished by complete erasure. Robert Reed understood this socio-political reality. He realized his classical armor was not enough. He needed to construct a massive, highly visible, flawless physical shield to deflect the predatory gaze of the studio bosses and the ravenous press. In 1954, he surrendered to the agonizing pressure of the American system. He stepped blindly into a devastating psychological compromise by legally marrying a woman named Marilyn Rosenberger. This was not a union born of authentic romantic truth, but a desperate, calculated survival tactic. It was a classic lavender marriage designed to project the ultimate sanitized image of traditional American domesticity. They welcomed a beautiful, innocent daughter named Karen. On the polished public surface, Robert Reed was playing the flawless heterosexual family man. He had successfully built the exact traditional fortress that conservative society demanded from its rising stars. He was utilizing his profound classical training not to entertain, but to lie to his own innocent wife, devastating her human reality in the process. But you cannot permanently suffocate a genuine human soul inside a fabricated domestic prison. The agonizing internal warfare tore him apart. He fiercely loved his young daughter, but the fundamentally suppressed truth of his biological identity poisoned the marital waters. He was acting 24 hours a day, trapped inside his own home. By 1959, the heavy domestic illusion collapsed. The marriage ended in divorce. He realized the terrifying truth that no amount of orchestrated domestic acting could ever successfully alter his genuine reality. He could not forcefully change the core of his own hidden identity. Entering the volatile, transformative decade of the 1960s, free from his domestic cage but still hiding his illegal identity from the television industry, he threw his fractured soul into genuine classical expression. He secured the prestigious, highly coveted leading role of the brilliant, compassionate defense attorney Kenneth Preston in the groundbreaking television drama, The Defenders. This was not a cheap, mindless situational comedy. The Defenders fiercely tackled controversial, deeply complex social and moral issues, directly challenging the conservative American public. He was delivering moving, highly intelligent monologues about fundamental human rights, social justice, and moral truth directly into millions of monitored American living rooms. Visualize the sickening psychological paradox of this era. The American capitalist machine praised his highly ethical television character while simultaneously threatening his actual physical existence. He was being universally hailed as the intellectual champion of justice, defending the marginalized on the glowing screen. Yet, behind the heavy studio cameras, he was paralyzed by sheer psychological fear. He was forced to hide his authentic identity simply to survive. He was allowed to practice genuine classical art, but he was strictly forbidden from ever actually being a genuine human being. The artistic sanctuary Robert Reed had built vanished when The Defenders was abruptly canceled. He was thrust back into the ruthless, unforgiving reality of the American casting system. In the predatory ecosystem of the entertainment industry, profound classical talent does not pay the monthly rent. He was a brilliant Shakespearean titan drowning in a terrifying ocean of mounting financial obligations. The studio system recognized his desperation and prepared to spring the most agonizing psychological trap of his existence. When the manufactured television script for a new situational comedy called The Brady Bunch landed on his desk, he looked at it with physical disgust. It was a mindless, sanitized, incredibly goofy domestic sitcom designed to sell consumer products to an oblivious American public. To a man who had dedicated his soul to the complex moral tragedies of the classical British stage, reading the hollow plastic dialogue of Mike Brady was a psychological insult. It was the ultimate artistic degradation. He viewed the shallow suburban script as a sickening joke, mocking his cultivated theatrical intellect. But the most humiliating detail of this corporate transaction was that he wasn't even the network's first choice. The executives had originally wanted the gritty, brilliant actor Gene Hackman to play the flawless television patriarch. Only after Paramount executives rejected Hackman, deeming him not famous enough at the time, did the network toss the cheap plastic script down to Robert Reed. He was forced to swallow his artistic pride, knowing he was a desperate backup choice for a mindless television clown. Visualize the terrifying agony of this historical moment. He was a magnificent, powerful theatrical warhorse, forced to quietly pull a cheap, brightly painted plastic cart simply to survive the brutal economic machine. The Hollywood machine does not care about artistic integrity or classical backgrounds. It demands total submission to its profitable commercial formulas. Driven by sheer financial necessity, he closed his weary eyes, picked up the corporate pen, and signed a document that sealed his professional fate. The exact second his signature stained the restrictive contract, the iron doors of his ultimate psychological prison slammed shut. He believed he was simply signing up for a temporary, lucrative commercial job to quickly pay his bills. He did not realize he had sold his authentic soul to a ruthless television machine that would lock him inside a sanitized, claustrophobic, artificial living room for the rest of his life. He was transformed into Mike Brady. The highly intellectual, complex Shakespearean actor was erased, replaced by a cheerful, sanitized, flawless, heterosexual television father. He was forced to stand under the blinding artificial studio lights, delivering mindlessly cheerful dialogue on a fake AstroTurf lawn. Meanwhile, his cultured, bleeding soul was screaming in silent agony underneath his manufactured corporate smile. He had purchased his financial survival, but the heavy price was a suffocating, endless psychological hell. The television network had successfully bought him, turning one of the greatest dramatic actors of his generation into a monitored, trapped, highly profitable corporate puppet chained to a bright orange artificial couch. To understand the devastating tragedy of Robert Reed, you must dissect the nauseating hypocritical paradox of the Mike Brady character. You must tear away the nostalgic television layer and look directly into the terrifying mechanics of the American broadcasting machine. The massive American public tuned in every single week to absorb the moral teachings of the perfect television patriarch. The character of Mike Brady was manufactured to deliver heavy moral sermons on fundamental human honesty. Mike Brady stood in the sanitized artificial living room, looking down at his television children, and constantly preached about the critical importance of absolute truth. He taught millions of impressionable youths that they must be authentic, honest, and bravely stand up for their genuine beliefs. He delivered scripted speeches stating that a person's true moral character is defined by their ability to speak their own truth, no matter how terrifying the consequences might be. But look at the agonizing psychological torture occurring behind the cameras. The profoundly brilliant, sensitive man delivering these beautiful sermons on human honesty was being forced by the network to execute the most devastating lie of his existence. The executives had placed a massive, invisible financial gun against his head. They forced him into silent compliance, dictating that if he ever allowed his authentic biological reality to slip out, he would be professionally annihilated. The American capitalist machine was utilizing a terrified, closeted human being to aggressively preach the high virtues of total honesty to an oblivious nation. The system demanded that he teach the public how to be true to themselves, while they simultaneously forced him to swallow his own literal soul. He was bleeding to psychological death in the middle of a highly illuminated stage. Every time he delivered a poignant, heartwarming line about honesty, the heavy invisible chains pulled tighter around his neck. He was suffocating inside his own lucrative artificial house, realizing that his celebrated television legacy was being constructed on top of the ashes of his erased identity. This is the terrifying peak of American corporate hypocrisy. The executives capitalized on his polished, flawless facade, utilizing his theatrical talents to construct the ultimate traditional heterosexual illusion. They robbed him of his basic human rights, forcing him to hide in the freezing darkness so that the conservative public could feel safe and comforted by his beautiful manufactured smile. He was forced to become the most highly trusted man in the entire nation, while being strictly forbidden from ever actually being himself. The human mind is incredibly resilient, but it is not made of indestructible iron. You can force a Shakespearean actor to swallow his biological identity. You can lock him inside a sanitized artificial living room. But the profound pressure of living a 24-hour lie will inevitably shatter the fragile human psyche. By 1971, Robert Reed was running on psychological fumes. He was buckling under the crushing weight of the American television machine. He had briefly stepped outside the claustrophobic boundaries of his sitcom prison to film a television production of The Man Who Came to Dinner. On the surface, he still projected the flawless image of the calm, composed American patriarch. But underneath that professional skin, he was breaking down. The invisible chains of his hidden homosexual identity were strangling him. This internal warfare began to manifest directly on the physical set. The sophisticated, classically trained actor transformed into a bitter, highly irritable, and deeply hostile presence. He lashed out at the cinematic crew, unable to physically contain the volcano of repressed human agony boiling inside his chest. The respected television director Buzz Kulik observed this shocking behavioral decay. Kulik did not know the specific biological secret that Robert Reed was desperately hiding. He did not know about the heavy paranoia, the underground secret life, or the terrifying threats from the broadcasting network. But Kulik could clearly see a broken human being destroying himself in front of the blinding studio cameras. In a quiet moment away from the chaotic production crew, the director cornered the exhausted actor. He looked directly into the terrified eyes of the ultimate American father and delivered a firm ultimatum. He quietly stated, "I do not know what your specific problem is, but you must solve it right now." Let the sheer gravity of that quiet confrontation crash over your mind. That single simple sentence acted as the final drop of water that shattered the psychological dam. The flawless, highly composed, masculine television patriarch physically collapsed. Right there, in the dark, quiet shadows of the Hollywood soundstage, Robert Reed broke down. He began to weep with the profound, agonizing intensity of a terrified, helpless child. This was not an orchestrated theatrical performance. It was the uncontrollable sobbing of a sensitive human soul that had been tortured by a dictatorial capitalist system for his entire adult life. Visualize the sickening tragedy of this historical image. The most famous worship symbol of flawless traditional male composure in the American nation was reduced to a trembling, shattered mess on a cold studio floor. The manufactured masculine armor was revealed to be nothing but a thin, fragile paper curtain attempting to hide a terrified human being. He was weeping for his stolen youth. He was weeping for his compromised artistic integrity. But most profoundly, he was sobbing because he realized the terrifying truth that he was permanently trapped. The entertainment system had successfully locked him inside a lucrative, suffocating lie. He was carrying the massive emotional weight of the American television audience, teaching millions of oblivious people how to live with honesty, while he lacked the basic human right to simply be honest with himself. The ultimate tragic reality crashed down upon his exhausted shoulders. He was drowning in plain sight, suffocated by his own manufactured success, and no one in the world was going to rescue his bleeding soul. He realized that the fake AstroTurf lawn of his television home had become his permanent psychological graveyard. The executives had won the war, bending a brilliant human artist to their financial will, extracting his physical youth, and leaving behind a terrified, broken man quietly weeping in the dark. If you look at the highly publicized behind-the-scenes historical record of the Brady Bunch, The studio executives and the aggressive tabloid press painted Robert Reed as a terrifying nightmare. They characterized him as a profoundly arrogant, insufferable theatrical snob who was ungrateful for his commercial success. He was reported to be constantly screaming at the exhausted cinematic crew, throwing his brightly colored plastic television scripts across the sanitized artificial living room. To the oblivious outside world, he appeared to be suffering from a massive case of Hollywood ego, throwing childish tantrums on a corporate stage. But you must tear away that superficial corporate narrative and look directly into the psychological mechanics of a trapped human mind. You must understand the agonizing reality of his daily existence. He was forced to constantly perform mindless, humiliating slapstick comedy that insulted his profound classical intelligence. He aggressively refused to film humiliating television scenes where the flawless American patriarch was forced to foolishly slip on broken eggs or miraculously grow hair using a fake comedic hair tonic. He clashed with the powerful television producer Sherwood Schwartz on a daily basis, fighting an exhausting, unwinnable corporate war. But the ultimate psychological breaking point manifested in what the studio crew mockingly referred to as the infamous Strawberry Heaven incident. The sanitized comedic script required Robert Reed to walk into the artificial television kitchen and happily state that the entire house smelled exactly like sweet strawberry jam. It was a microscopic, highly insignificant throwaway television line, but Robert Reed snapped. He stormed off the illuminated television set and retreated into his private dressing room. He pulled out a massive academic encyclopedia and researched the exact chemical properties of boiling fruit. He marched back onto the set and screamed at the producers that physically boiling strawberries absolutely do not produce any physical scent. He refused to deliver the sanitized corporate lie. To the exhausted, frustrated television crew, this was the ultimate proof of his arrogant insanity. Why would a highly paid global television star halt a massive, expensive commercial production over the meaningless smell of boiling strawberries? But you must shift your psychological perspective. You must look directly at this bizarre behavior, not as an act of massive, arrogant ego, but as a devastating psychological defense mechanism. It was a desperate, terrifying human cry for help. Robert Reed was living the most dangerous lie in the American nation. He was a deeply closeted homosexual man forced by the capitalist machine to flawlessly perform the ultimate sanitized heterosexual American father. He lacked the fundamental human power to control the bloody lie that defined his physical and psychological existence. The executives had stolen his core identity. When you are forced to swallow a massive, terrifying lie about your own authentic soul, you will go psychologically frantic, desperately attempting to control the smallest, most insignificant microscopic truths surrounding you. He could not fight the network about his authentic, hidden sexuality because they would annihilate him. So he fought them about the exact physical scent of boiling strawberries. It was not about the sanitized television fruit. It was about a broken, suffocated human artist frantically trying to claw back one single shred of genuine, factual truth, simply to convince himself that he still possessed a dignified, authentic human soul inside that brightly lit corporate prison. To truly understand the complex humanity of Robert Reed, you must look past the corporate battles and the psychological breakdowns. In the middle of that terrifying artificial television desert, he miraculously cultivated a beautiful, hidden oasis of genuine human grace. He despised the manufactured shallow scripts, and he fought the producers every day. But the exact second the blinding studio lights turned on, and he looked directly at the 6 young, innocent child actors sitting on that fake AstroTurf lawn, his heavy armor melted. He refused to take his artistic frustration out on the children. Instead, he poured every ounce of his repressed, isolated human love directly into their young lives. He transformed from a bitter, trapped Shakespearean actor into a dedicated, fiercely protective surrogate father. The American television machine treated these young children as disposable, profitable comedic props. But Robert Reed refused to participate in their corporate dehumanization. He fiercely respected their genuine humanity. When the child actor playing his youngest son began to physically mature, Robert aggressively fought the producers to officially change the character's name from the childish Bobby directly to Bob. It was a microscopic script change to the network, but it was a massive act of genuine human dignity. He wanted that young boy to feel respected as a growing human being, not just a frozen, sanitized comedic punchline. He utilized his massive television salary not to drown his own sorrows, but to enrich their innocent young minds. During the production hiatus, he funded a massive, highly educational trip directly to London for the television children. He bought them expensive professional cameras, encouraging them to look through the physical lens and genuinely observe the beautiful reality of the actual world outside their sanitized Hollywood bubble. He taught them the sacred principles of classical acting, treating them exactly like respected theatrical students rather than disposable corporate commodities. He was planting the beautiful seeds of genuine classical art into the highly commercialized, shallow soil of the American sitcom. And in this deeply isolating, terrifying corporate environment, he was not entirely alone. He found a beautiful, necessary human sanctuary in his television wife, the incredibly brilliant, empathetic actress Florence Henderson. In the paranoid, dangerous ecosystem of 1970s Hollywood, where a single whispered rumor could destroy a human life, Florence quietly discovered his terrifying biological secret. But she did not expose him to the ravenous press. Instead, she formed an invisible protective human shield directly around his fragile, bleeding soul. She understood the agonizing psychological torture he was silently enduring every day. She fiercely protected his secret, providing him with a quiet emotional harbor where he could safely breathe. Reflect upon the heartbreaking irony of his surrogate fatherhood. He was a brilliant, sensitive, homosexual man forced by a conservative society to hide in the dark. He had a massive, endless reservoir of genuine human love trapped inside his chest, with nowhere safe to legally pour it. So he poured it directly into the fabricated, artificial family that the system had forced him to build. The ruthless television executives believed they were simply paying him to fake a sanitized, traditional American fatherhood. But right underneath their paranoid corporate noses, Robert Reed transformed that shallow comedic television trap into a genuine movie masterclass in unconditional human love. He saved those innocent television children from the toxic Hollywood machine, even while that exact same ruthless machine was crushing his own authentic soul. The American television machine sold Robert Reed to the entire nation as the flawless embodiment of sanitized traditional fatherhood. Every single Friday night, millions of devoted families gathered around their glowing screens, warmly absorbing his manufactured paternal wisdom. He aggressively projected a perfect image of domestic harmony. But you must tear away that profitable corporate illusion to see the horrifying tragedy bleeding in his actual physical reality. The most agonizing consequence of his contract was not the destruction of his classical artistic integrity. The ultimate psychological toll was the violent destruction of his authentic human family. When his desperate, suffocating lavender marriage collapsed in 1959, a heavy emotional distance began to grow between Robert and his young biological daughter, Karen. The network demanded his absolute physical presence for incredibly long, grueling production hours. He was forced to dedicate almost his entire waking existence to raising 6 fake, sanitized television children. Simultaneously, as a terrified, closeted homosexual man living in an unforgiving era, he intentionally built an invisible psychological wall around his private life. He was frantically trying to protect his innocent daughter from the destructive radioactive fallout of his hidden, authentic identity. But you cannot selectively build an emotional wall. The exact same defensive barrier that protected his biological secret also blocked out any genuine, intimate emotional connection with his only biological child. He was surviving the ruthless Hollywood ecosystem, but he was slowly losing the only human being who shared his actual blood. Visualize this profoundly devastating cinematic scene. The physical setting is a crowded, chaotic, loud airport terminal. It is a transient, emotionally volatile physical space. The flawless, perfectly composed, manufactured American television father is standing there. He's quietly dropping off his biological daughter, Karen. She is no longer a dependent little girl, but a young, independent woman pulling physically away. They exchange a brief, awkward, superficial goodbye, and then she simply turns around. She begins to walk away from him, disappearing into the anonymous moving crowd. The television director does not scream cut. The sanitized comedic studio laugh track does not magically play. Robert Reed is left standing entirely alone, and in that specific agonizing quiet moment, the heavy psychological dam permanently shatters. The flawless, highly composed, stoic masculine television armor breaks into a million shattered pieces. Right there, in the middle of the crowded public terminal, the perfect, flawless father of the entire American nation begins to physically, uncontrollably weep. He was sobbing from the darkest, deepest, most terrified hollow pit of his bleeding soul. He realized the unchangeable reality. He was universally worshipped by millions of oblivious American strangers, successfully acting exactly like the perfect loving father. But his exact own biological child walked away like he was a complete stranger. The Hollywood capitalist machine had successfully robbed him of the single most profound, genuine human connection he was ever allowed to possess. He had spent his entire adult life desperately teaching the children of the world how to navigate their emotional pain, while utterly failing to bridge the agonizing chasm between himself and his own daughter. He was the revered father to the entire globe, but an agonizing ghost to his very own flesh and blood. The staggering weight of that ultimate cosmic irony crushed his exhausted spirit into the cold terminal floor. The cameras were not rolling, the script was not written, and for the first time in his fabricated life, the tears streaming down his face were terrifyingly real. You must tear down the hypocritical narrative that blames Robert Reed for his own agonizing demise. The sanitized American media painted him as the ultimate wholesome television father who was hiding a scandalous personal secret. But you must understand the terrifying direct correlation between his manufactured pristine public safety and his ultimate biological destruction. To fiercely protect the massive, incredibly lucrative global syndication rights of the Brady Bunch, the network executives demanded that his entire physical existence remain flawlessly sanitized. He was aggressively forbidden from ever forming a genuine, healthy, loving, romantic relationship out in the open, bright sunlight. If the flawless American patriarch was photographed simply holding the hand of another adult male while walking down a public street, his career would violently end overnight. The executives had pushed him directly into a suffocating, terrifying, emotional cage. But the fundamental human desire for profound romantic intimacy cannot be successfully suppressed. When you outlaw healthy public human love, you forcefully push it directly down into the darkest, most dangerous, invisible shadows. By day, Robert Reed was playing the flawless, composed American television saint. He was the ultimate moral compass for an entire generation, dispensing wholesome advice under the blinding artificial studio lights. But when those lights turned off, he was forced to frantically sneak out into the terrifying dark. He sought brief physical encounters inside marginalized, highly risky underground gay bars and dark public parks. The capitalist machine robbed him of the basic human right to safely love in the open. They forced him into dangerous, marginalized physical behaviors just to feel a single fleeting shred of genuine human connection. He was not a reckless man by nature. He was a profoundly desperate hostage seeking a single drop of water in a manufactured, ruthless corporate desert. In the terrifying spring of 1991, the ultimate devastating physical consequence of this engineered double life arrived. The cold medical test results shattered whatever fragile piece he had left. He tested positive for the devastating HIV virus. You must understand the historical context. This was an absolute death sentence during a deeply conservative era that offered no medical mercy and zero social empathy. And as if the universe needed to be even more exceptionally cruel, his exhausted body collapsed further. He was diagnosed with highly aggressive colon cancer in November of that exact same year. The sheer agonizing physical and psychological weight of constantly performing a 24-hour lie for decades had entirely ravaged his physical vessel, leaving him utterly vulnerable to destruction. Look directly at the true face of the killer. It was not just a biological virus that destroyed this brilliant, sensitive Shakespearean actor. The true culprit was the staggering, sickening hypocrisy of the 1970s American entertainment system. The media machine stripped him of his fundamental right to simply love safely under the warm sun. They built a pristine, highly profitable golden altar dedicated to traditional family values, and then they ruthlessly sacrificed his authentic human soul directly upon it. The system demanded that he remain perfectly safe for the oblivious television audience, but that exact forced safety is precisely what drove him directly into the arms of the Reaper. They forced him to walk blindly through the filthy, dangerous shadows simply because their lucrative, sanitized illusion was deemed vastly more valuable than his actual breathing life. They did not just stand by and watch him quietly die. They engineered the exact dark alleyway where death was silently waiting for him. You must examine the chilling, horrifying cinematic moment where a manufactured television script intersected directly with his fading physical reality. It is a profound historical document disguised as a sanitized, heartwarming holiday television special. But to understand this final act of physical suffocation, we must first look back at a desperate warning sign that the oblivious world missed. Years earlier, in 1975, he had fiercely fought to secure a shocking, highly controversial guest role on the popular drama Medical Center. He successfully played a highly respected biological male doctor who desperately wanted to physically transition to live an authentic life as a woman, Dr. Pat Caddison. In that specific dramatic television role, he was allowed to openly, fiercely scream directly at the studio cameras, loudly demanding the fundamental basic human right to simply exist as his true, authentic self without facing terrifying professional annihilation. He poured every agonizing drop of his own profound hidden terror directly into that specific television performance. But the oblivious American television audience watched the emotional performance blindly, assuming it was just another brilliant piece of artificial acting. They failed to hear the genuine, agonizing human cry for help. The capitalist television machine ignored his bleeding soul and simply handed him another hollow script. In 1988, the network forced the exhausted cast back together for an artificial, nostalgic cash grab called A Very Brady Christmas. The dramatic, manufactured climax of this specific television movie required the flawless American patriarch, Mike Brady, to become trapped underneath a massive, heavy pile of collapsed architectural concrete. He was required to act out a terrifying scene of profound physical suffocation. But you must understand the terrifying reality occurring underneath his manufactured television costume. The massive concrete blocks pinning him to the cold studio floor were fake. But the profound, terrifying physical suffocation crushing his actual human chest was terrifyingly real. His compromised physical immune system was collapsing inward. A ruthless biological storm, a severe terminal condition, was actively destroying his actual physical ability to successfully breathe. When you watch this specific historical television scene, you are not watching a brilliant Shakespearean actor successfully perform a scripted moment of artificial panic. You are watching a profoundly terrified, fading man screaming for actual physical and psychological oxygen. He was utilizing the sanitized artificial television script as a desperate, agonizing vehicle to express the profound physical agony that the American system had forbidden him from publicly acknowledging. The raw panic burning inside his exhausted eyes was authentic. He was trapped, crushed underneath the massive, suffocating weight of the manufactured Brady legacy, while a lethal internal enemy was rapidly destroying his actual human life. The chilling historical metaphor is impossible to ignore. The architectural rubble was made of lightweight studio foam, but the massive psychological rubble had been accumulating for decades. He was pinned down by the lucrative corporate lie he had been forced to maintain his entire life. Every single desperate gasp for air on that brightly lit artificial set mirrored his desperate need to simply breathe freely in his own private existence. The massive American audience sat in their comfortable suburban living rooms, watching their favorite television father bravely fight for his physical life under the heavy debris, unaware that they were witnessing a live documentary of his actual physical demise. He was suffocating under the crushing expectations of millions of complete strangers who demanded he remain a flawless illusion until his very last breath. He delivered the ultimate performance of a man fighting for survival, but the survival he was truly fighting for was not against fake studio concrete. It was against an industry that had forced him to trade his human truth for a golden cage, leaving him buried alive directly in plain sight. By 1992, the heavy, inevitable final chapter arrived. The terrifying biological sentence that had been silently destroying his physical immune system finally took absolute control. But even in his most profoundly vulnerable human state, the American media machine did not grant him the basic fundamental human right to simply suffer in peace. The ravenous tabloid press was circling like starved vultures, desperate to tear down the ultimate flawless American television father. To fiercely protect himself from this sickening public execution, he was forced to enter the clinical hospital under a fabricated fake name. Visualize the terrifying tragedy of this specific hospital room. This was not a warm, healing sanctuary. It was his final psychological fortress. He demanded that every single physical window blind be drawn tightly shut. He locked out the bright, warm sun, a brilliant classical artist who had spent his entire adult life standing under the massive, blinding, artificial lights of the American television industry, was now choosing to die in absolute, pitch-black darkness. Why did he choose this agonizing isolation? Because he refused to give the media the sickening satisfaction of their fake commercialized pity. But the most devastating, heartbreaking truth is worse. He chose to suffer in terrifying silence because he was terrified of destroying the sanitized, innocent childhood memories of millions of oblivious American television viewers. He was sacrificing his own final moments of genuine human vulnerability to protect the exact same manufactured corporate television brand that had destroyed his authentic life. He decided to take the massive, suffocating lie directly into his own physical grave. It is the ultimate psychological tragedy. He had been forced to live his entire adult life trapped inside a metaphorical dark closet constructed by the conservative entertainment industry, and now, in his final days, he built a literal dark closet to physically die in. He was bleeding to physical death in the dark simply so the television network could safely continue to broadcast profitable, cheerful reruns for all of eternity. He was playing the highly protective, flawless father for the entire American nation directly up until his agonizing human breath. But inside that darkened hospital room, a single beautiful ray of genuine human grace miraculously appeared. The massive psychological wall that had separated him from his own biological flesh and blood finally collapsed. His daughter, Karen, stepped directly into the dark, quiet shadows. The agonizing distance that had broken his heart in that crowded airport terminal years ago was finally bridged. In those final, terrifying hours, he was no longer the manufactured, flawless television patriarch. He was just a profoundly exhausted, terrified human father, quietly holding the physical hand of his only real child. It was the only genuine, authentic human connection he was allowed to safely possess before the heavy, dark curtain permanently fell. On the 12th of May, 1992, the suffocating dictatorial nightmare officially ended. Robert Reed took his final human breath in the quiet shadows. When the heavy news of his physical passing finally broke, the entire American nation wept. But they were not weeping for the profoundly complex, brilliant, sensitive artist who had just died in a darkened room. They were weeping for a manufactured plastic television character that never truly existed. The Hollywood system had successfully executed the ultimate historical illusion. They forced him to live a fake existence, and in the final, agonizing end, he helped them permanently bury his own authentic, bleeding soul. When Robert Reed finally took his last physical breath in the spring of 1992, the Hollywood machine immediately activated its ultimate damage control protocol. Even as his exhausted physical body was quietly growing cold, the ruthless network executives and aggressive public relations managers were scrambling to permanently sanitize his historical legacy. They released a highly polished, fabricated public statement claiming the beloved American television father had simply passed away from a brief, quiet battle with a socially acceptable internal illness, cancer. They desperately tried to neatly bury his profound, authentic truth directly under the exact same fake, brightly colored astroturf that he had been forced to stand on for his entire adult life. They wanted the oblivious American public to just keep smiling and keep watching the highly profitable syndicated reruns. But the universe possesses a terrifying way of delivering ultimate historical justice. The heavens have a massive, inescapable net. You can force a sensitive man to live a massive, suffocating lie for his entire waking existence. But you cannot bribe, manipulate, or silence the cold, hard ink of an official medical document. Just days after the sanitized corporate mourning began, the unthinkable happened. His official medical certificate was leaked directly to the ravenous public. And right there, printed in undeniable black ink, was the exact biological truth the television system had desperately tried to erase. It was not just a standard terminal illness. It was the deeply stigmatized immune virus, the ultimate terrifying societal taboo of that specific era, HIV. That single fragile piece of white paper functioned as a massive, deafening scream directly from beyond the physical grave. It tore the hypocritical velvet curtain of the American entertainment industry straight down the middle. An entire oblivious nation was suddenly paralyzed by profound shock. The sanitized golden illusion shattered into a million microscopic pieces. Millions of people suddenly had to look directly into the horrifying mirror of their own conservative society. They slowly realized the sickening human cost of their own innocent evening entertainment. They had forced a brilliant, highly trained classical artist to surrender his authentic soul. They had forced a lonely man to trade his fundamental human dignity and walk entirely alone into the dangerous underground shadows. And for what? What was the ultimate heavy price of his literal human life and his broken heart? Simply so, the American public could comfortably sit in their warm suburban living rooms and blindly consume exactly 30 minutes of fake, sanitized, manufactured television comedy every single Friday night. It was a magnificent, celebrated life, but it was simultaneously the most flawless, highly profitable psychological destruction the corporate machine had ever successfully executed. We refused to let his profound, beautiful, bleeding human soul remain permanently locked inside that manufactured suburban television cage. We fiercely choose to remember the brilliant, deeply complex man who was crushed underneath the heavy plastic crown of the ultimate American father. If you are profoundly moved by the heartbreaking hidden truth of Robert Reed, and you fiercely want to support our dedicated ongoing mission to tear down the toxic, hypocritical walls of old Hollywood, please gently hit the subscribe button right now. Please leave a like on this video to honor his genuine, authentic memory. Join our growing community as we respectfully continue to drag these beautiful stolen historical legends out of the terrifying dark shadows and permanently, safely bring them back into the warm, authentic light.